Hello and welcome to the next lecture from the History of Christian Worship Practices. This is John Chilcote, Worship Professor at Nebraska Christian College. Let's now look at the musical notation of plain chant in more specific detail. Plain chants are notes in order based on a mode, sort of like a scale that we use today, and the duration of each one of these notes was actually based on the syllables that you would sing instead of the note duration itself. The neum is a musical notation sign for one or a group of successful musical pitches, and it's the predecessor of the modern musical note. So a neum could stand for one pitch or a group of successful pitches that would all go with one syllable. Neumes have been used in Christian liturgical chant as well as in early medieval polyphony, so multiple voices outside of the Christian liturgical chants. And also we've found them in some secular monophony, single melodic lines. There are actually early neumes that were developed from Greek textual accents that were gradually modified into shapes, and they showed the pitch, direction, and vocal ornamentation to be performed live. So you would have these little notations over syllables that would tell you to raise a pitch as you held out a note, or to ornament a pitch and go up and back down as you sang a syllable. Well, these little markings eventually became independent and became standardized into the neumes. Before long, neumes were heightened so as to suggest a specific melody line. A musical staff of 4 lines evolved about the year 1000. So instead of a 5-line staff, we have a 4-line staff, but this staff would allow you to see the pitch differentiation and because you could see if a neum was on a line or on a space. Neumes placed on the staff showed exact pitch, allowing the singer to read an unfamiliar melody. Even within Western Europe, differing systems of neumes were used different geographical regions, but by about 1200 AD, neumes had assumed the characteristic square shapes that are still used in the modern notation of Gregorian chant. Whether and how neumes indicated rhythm remains a subject of controversy. Musical notes with time values evolved from neumes in the last half of the 13th century. As we look at plain chant notation, or square notes as they're often referred to, we can see the similarities and differences from our modern notation. Some people look at square notes and think they're some little more than a pious affectation. Some modern notes are more advanced in the same way that modern English is more advanced over Middle English, or the iPod is over the 8-track tape. Our modern notation is not just a modernization of the square notes. It's not exactly true. The square note is precisely appropriate for the purposes which they were used. You wouldn't render a Beethoven symphony in neumes any more than modern notes are used for a long-term chant solution. There is no viable substitute for learning how to sing in the way the church has sung for centuries, with the aid of notation developed specifically for the chant. Musicologists observe that singing from square notes comes closest to replicating the timeless sound heard in the earliest centuries of Christianity. That's why they are still in use today. It's not that anyone is opposed to innovation, but the square notes themselves were an innovation by Guido di Arezzo, a father of modern notation. The point is that neumes capture the essence of the sound and feel of chant and express those better than any alternative. This was from the handout Square Notes. So what they're saying is, even if you used modern or current notation to write out a Gregorian chant, there would be small nuances or small ways of expression that would be lost between using the neumes versus using modern notation, similar to using English letters to write out a foreign language. There's just something lost in translation. So when you read a neum, the chant is written on 4 lines, which act just like a 5-note staff. However, there's no time signature or a key signature. The pitches are based on a major scale, whole, whole, half, whole, 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 half. And with the chant, this sequence of whole and half steps never varies. The only thing that changes is your starting point. If, for example, you begin on a do and end on a do, the placement of the whole and half steps will be as follows. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step. If you begin on re, the relationship of the whole and half steps to each other will still be the same. Again, only your starting note has changed. So your re to re scale or mode will sound like this. Whole step, half step, whole step, whole step, whole step, half step, whole step. So once you understand this slide rule principle, you'll be able to sing any chant melody. There are 2 clefs, the do clef and the fa clef, right? Also known as the C clef and the F clef. And this simply tells you where the do is on the lines. So instead of having a key signature, you just know where do begins. So if we were looking at this first line, Kyrie eleison, we would see that it is in a do clef, the C clef. So it is starting on do. Kyrie eleison. So do, do, ti, and then further on we'll read how to read the rest of it. All right? The rhythm, it's worth noting that that is not written. The clivus is 2 notes on 1 syllable, each with their own pulse, and the top note is sung first. So you descend from the upper note to the lower note, but sustain the same syllable. The torculus is 3 notes on 1 syllable, each with their own pulse, and you start lower, higher, and then lower again. While the parectus is 3 notes on 1 syllable, it begins up, and then it goes down, and then it goes back up again. Notice a couple things. First of all, it is written with a sliding look because early transcribers didn't want to lift their quill pens to write the figure. Later it became a convention, but there's not a slide in the sound. It's just 3 clean legato notes, each of which is held 1 beat. Notice as well in the torculus, when you go up and back down, they are successive notes. And the parectus, the last note, is right above the middle note. So if we were to figure out how to sing this chant, Into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit, Alleluia, Alleluia, we first need to find where the do is and where the fa is. Do is the top line, so we can see that fa is the second line from the bottom. So now we know that bottom space to the second line is a half step, and the top space to the top line is also a half step. So singing this with every neum being at 1 pulse, we would sing do, re, mi, fa, 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 sol, la, so, so, fa, 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 mi, sol, la, so, so, fa, re, fa, so, so, fa, fa. Or, into thy hands, O Lord, I commend my spirit. Alleluia, Alleluia. The first type of polyphony we talk about is organum, and it's a decoration of the chant with a second part, usually in the bass. So you'll have the normal melodic chant in the upper voice, and the bass will add a second note, which will start to give some sort of harmonic progression or underlying harmony. There are a few moving notes just under the chant. One of the things that is great about having written notation is now we can go back, and while we don't have actual recording of music from that time, we can recreate it and record modern musicians singing in these chants. So the next few slides, we're going to hear some variations of polyphony. First with an organum on the text for Kyrie, based off of Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy, or Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. And notice the extent that the syllables are held out and drawn out and ornamented in the chant. And notice the second voicing and how it moves subtly and a lot slower compared to the chant at the top. The next bit of polyphony we will listen to is Trop souvent brunette in seculum. This is called a double motet because you have two individual lines that are being sung by two different voices, and they are basically two chants being sung simultaneously. The third line, as you see on the bottom, is in seculum, and it will actually be played by an organ. So we have three voices, and you will hear some chords begin to develop and some harmonic progression, but it will still not sound like our standard Western music. But this again is the beginning of polyphony, when we are singing and hearing multiple notes being sung at the same time. In polyphony, a motet is known as four independent moving parts. As opposed to that double motet we just heard, a true motet has four voices that are all singing the same lyrics, and they may be singing them at different times, but we begin to hear some harmonic structure and progressions developing. We're going to listen to Sicut Cervus by Palestrina from 1525 to 1594. He was the most prolific church musician and composer of the time in the motet era. So here's a loose word-for-word translation from Latin to English. As the deer longs for springs of water, so longs my soul for you, O God. Or in Latin, it would be Sicut cervus desiderat ad fontes aquarum ita desiderat anima mea ad te Deus. The last motet we will listen to today is Ubi Caritas, and actually two different musical settings. The first will just be a plain song chant, and the second will be a full motet written by the modern composer Maurice Durufle in 1960. Ubi Caritas is taken from the antiphons sung during the ceremony of the washing of the feet at the Mass of the Last Supper on Holy Thursday or Maundy Thursday. As is the entire Mass of the Last Supper, this hymn is intimately connected with the Eucharist and is thus often used during the exposition of the Blessed Sacrament. Recent tradition has the first line, Ubi Caritas et Amor, which translates to where charity and love are. But certain very early manuscripts show Ubi Caritas est vera, where charity is true. The current Roman Missal, so the current Roman Catholic Mass, favors this later version, while the 1962 Roman Missal and classic music favors the former. So looking at the translation, Ubi Caritas et Amor Deus ibi est. Congregavit nos in unum Christi amor, exultemus et in ipso incundemur, timeamus et amemus Deum vivum, et ex corde diligamus non sincero. And you can see the translation there. Where charity and love are, God is there. Christ's love has gathered us unto one. Let us rejoice and be pleased in him. Let us fear, let us love the living God, and we may love each other with a sincere heart. So as you listen to this plain song chant, notice the melody, notice the square notes, the notation, and you should be able to follow the music as it plays. And then notice how they adapted the original plain song chant for a four-part harmony in our modern motet. Ubi caritas est vera, Deus ibi est, congregavit nos in unum Christi amor, exultemus et in ipso iucundemus, timeamus et amemus Deum vivum, et ex corde diligamus nos in cielo. Ubi caritas est vera, Deus ibi est, simul ergo hominum congregamur, et nos mente dividamur, caveamus, cessent urgia maligna, cessent lipes, et in medio nostri sit Christus Deus. Ubi caritas est vera, Deus ibi est, simul quoque cum Beatrice videamus, gloriam per vultum tuum, Christe Deus, gaudium quod est impensum, atque probum, secula per infinita seculorum. Ubi caritas est vera, Deus ibi est, As we listen to this modern adaptation of Ubi Caritas, notice the melody is still retained, although it is expanded out across all four voices, and we hear a bit more of harmonic structure and a bit more of a Western sound.
And the chord progressions are evident, but we still retain the plainsong chant feel. Drawfla uses just the text of the first stanza of this antiphon, and he gives us a great choral arrangement, one that is sung around the world to this day.
This records our conversation about music within the Middle Ages, the development of written notation, and polyphony as the monastic orders developed music within the Church of the second millennium.